There it is.
This is bad news.
My God.
Falling out right now.
Anything could happen.
Get on! Wow.
I'll watch the video later.
They dry mop in this. Chris or Mark, so these airplanes fly into the hurricane. They're not dropping silver iodide. They're not cloud seeding. You mentioned yourself, it's a warm core storm.
So I'll talk a little bit about cloud seeding and stuff, because cloud seeding does exist. It's regulated by the federal government in the U.S. I'm sure Canada has similar regulations.
I think it's mostly used in Alberta to prevent a major hail outbreak from forming. You know, they try to make the rain fall before it becomes hail.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. I saw a job posting at Idaho Power where the meteorologist would be working with the weather modification team to, when there was a storm coming in, they would cloud seed near their reservoirs to get more snow so that it would fill the reservoir with the spring snowmelt. But that was only done with this in Alberta. That requires an already existing weather system. With this in Idaho, that requires an already existing weather system. And also, we're only talking about doing this on the scale of like tens of square kilometers, right? And even then, it's not very effective. Like,
yeah, less than 50%.
Right. Even on small scale stuff.
And that 50%, you could argue it might have rained anyways,
or snowed, or right, or but it's not very effective on small scales. And also, don't you think if the Liberals were controlling the weather, they would have taken out Mar-a-Lago like in 2016 when he was first elected?
That was totally my point the whole time.
It just doesn't make sense. I think you posted that. Like, it doesn't make sense. And also, like, we can hardly predict the weather right 3 days in advance. How are we going to control it? We can't get astronauts off the space station in a timely fashion. How are we going to steer a hurricane? Like, it's just not possible.
Well, how many nuclear bombs a minute are going off? How many Hiroshimas are going off a minute, energy equivalent for a hurricane?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a lot, right?
It's a lot.
It's the
like
amount
a small
of
hurricane,
energy.
like your average one, you're talking like a Hiroshima every 3 seconds. That's a small
The
one.
amount
When
of
you go
energy,
up to category 5, you're multiplying like the Richter scale to get up there energy-wise, right?
Right. And it's funny to me because, like, we are modifying the weather. We are making hurricanes worse. We are making floods worse. And we're doing it with climate change and fossil fuels. We're doing it slowly. We're doing it globally. And we are not doing it on specific weather systems. It is not possible for us to steer hurricanes. It's not possible for us to create hurricanes. The U.S. government tried, back when they were doing MK Ultra and all the other stuff. That brings me to my
next point is you can file a patent. So people have been sending me these, this is a patent for a weather modification machine. It's like, well, you can file a patent without it necessarily working.
Yes, that's exactly right. There are many, and the reason they do that, you pointed this out in the comment thread, the reason they do that is so that other companies don't steal that intellectual property before they take it to market, if they ever take it to market.
I can probably then say a few words about cloud seeding. Cloud seeding is an attempt to get clouds that are not raining to rain. You can imagine the frustration of a farmer who finds his crops withering for lack of rain, and yet all these clouds are passing by overhead with lots of condensed water, but it's all in the cloud droplet form. Raindrops are not forming. He would give anything if he could just get this process to, one of these two processes to work, the collision coalescence or the ice phase process. If the cloud has supercooled water, he might have a chance. And this is the way you do it. You inject into the cloud some freezing nuclei. You want to get a few of these droplets to freeze. And a good freezing nuclei would be a compound called silver iodide. AgI is the chemical formula for it, because it has a crystal structure very much like that of ice. And so if a particle of silver iodide hits a supercooled cloud droplet, it is likely to cause it to freeze, and then this process could start. So there is a big industry today in cloud seeding of cold clouds. I don't know if I forgot to mention it, but a cloud which has no part of it at a temperature below freezing is often called a warm cloud. Well, that's not going to work for silver iodide cloud seeding. You need to have supercooled water in that droplet, in that cloud for it to work. It would have to be something like this. In that case, you inject the silver iodide either from the ground or from an aircraft or from a rocket, and you hope that you're putting in just enough and not too much. What happens if you put in too much? If you put in too much, you're going to freeze a large number of cloud droplets, and they're all going to be competing for the same water, so they're not going to grow. So on average, you have to freeze about 1 in a million. To make this most effective, you want to freeze about 1 in a million of the cloud droplets. Then you would get 1 million cloud droplets contributing to one snowflake. That would be ideal. This is a bit of a dirty subject, though, because there is a lot of people doing this, a lot of cash being handed around and hopeful farmers paying for this. But the scientific, and I should say statistical evidence that this works is not so clear. And the National Science Foundation has stopped funding most of research on cloud seeding because the people that were doing that work were not maintaining the highest standards of statistical verification of their work. The way you need to do, the problem is if you seed a cloud and it rains, how do you know that it wasn't going to rain anyway? That's the big problem. So in order to do this properly, you would have to seed perhaps 1,000 clouds, half with a placebo. You do a blind test, because if you allow the people that are doing the seeding to pick the clouds they're going to seed, they may pick the clouds that look most likely to rain anyway. So you really need to maintain very high standards of statistical verification on this, and in the early days this was not done. The field is beginning to come back now with a little higher level of statistical verification, and it's beginning to become acceptable again scientifically. But as I say, there's still a big industry that, for example, every year seeding all along the Sierra Nevada range in California is done, and the claim is that that has been increasing the snowpack every year. Even in the tropics, there is an industry claiming that they can seed warm clouds. This is even less likely to be the case. First of all, silver iodide wouldn't work. You'd have to have something else to get. In this case, you'd be trying to enhance this mechanism because it's the only one that can work for a warm cloud. And the way you would do that would be perhaps to drop some kind of hygroscopic nuclei into it, like salt particles, for example. Salt likes to pick up water, and if you could drop some salt crystals in there, you might be able to produce some droplets that are a little bit larger than the others, and that would enhance the collision coalescence mechanism. But as I say, this is even less further along as a scientific development than is the seeding of cold clouds. Question, yes?
Are there any environmental concerns putting silver iodide into
The question is, are there any environmental concerns? Well, yeah, that's been discussed widely. Silver iodide, you know, I think the saving thing here is that you don't want to put very much in anyway. So you only put a small amount of silver iodide in. And there has been, though, people have been able to find the remains of this in the environment. But as far as I know, silver iodide is not a particularly dangerous compound. But do a check for yourself. Just Google silver iodide. AGI is the chemical formula, and see if it has any. As far as I know, except for recent literature, which I haven't followed, there have been no environmental problems detected for that. But that's a good question worth looking into. Other questions on rain? Yes.
I guess the
legendary old belief that if you fired cannons, it could cause rain.
Yeah.
Any reality?
Not that I know of. I've heard that as well. Firing cannons was hoping to trigger this. I don't think there's any scientific evidence that works.
So we're talking about energy potential, you know, when you make calculations. And here's, you know, what is your energy potential? How do you measure? What do you compare energy to? And this is important because, you know, we could talk about a hurricane and its energy potential, but there was a lot of things that happened before the hurricane even happened. The outer band of the hurricane came through, Hurricane Milton, and it produced, when it hit sort of this dry area in southern Florida, a lot of very violent tornadoes. What's the energy output of just one tornado? Right? And when we're talking about that kind of energy, we're talking about nuclear bomb with 20,000 tons of TNT. You know, in order to grasp an amount of energy that we can even start to talk in, like, oh, it's 10 of these units. You know, we need a unit to agree on. That's something that's reasonable, something that's within our imagination. So it's not just like a whole bunch of numbers, you know, 23 numbers long, you know, just something that's comparable for us. So we're talking about the power of TNT, 20,000 tons of it, the power of a nuclear bomb. You know, when you think about a hurricane, just a large scale hurricane, you could be talking about on a Hiroshima bomb worth the equivalent 3 seconds. For a category 5, you might be talking numbers of Hiroshimas a second, right? Now, why am I bringing this up? Because people seem to have this crazy idea going on right now that we are controlling the climate and we are controlling weather in order to create climate change. And no one can give me a good reason why we're trying to convince you there's climate change. You know, it's like, oh, they're just crazy, mad leftists who want to convince you. No, this is science papers that take a lot of research and time. And we know that a hurricane is not something you can just draw up. So you're talking about, I had a calculation somewhere on another page. I've lost it now. I could probably look it up here really quickly, but we're talking about a hurricane using the energy equivalent of the entire output of what we're creating ourselves, on Earth. A large hurricane like that, like when Milton comes through, the amount of energy it's using is probably more than all energy that humans are creating combined. How are we going to find the energy to create a hurricane and move it around and direct it? For some reason you can't explain why we'd want to destroy our own cities, right? There is truth that this is a man-made situation. Yes, there is, and we've known about it for a long time. This is from Harvard University, this article. Research shows a company modeled and predicted global warming with shocking skill and accuracy starting in the 1970s. What company would that be? Exxon disputed climate findings for years, despite having internal papers by their own scientists that shockingly modeled the rate of climate change. They said by the year 2000, there'll be this much change. The tipping point will be about here. They knew. And they spent billions of dollars to make you doubt this and to convince you that I'm the enemy. Billions so that they could make trillions of dollars. And every time you sit there and talk about a conspiracy theory, you're letting these guys off the hook. And not only that, you're saying crazy shit that people are suffering in Florida right now. And you're sitting there, oh, it's just all the government doing it to them. Even the worst governor you could think of down there in Florida, DeSantis, the guy's a complete knob, is doing everything that you would expect somebody to do. Because it doesn't matter about what his politics are compared to mine when there's a disaster happening and people are dying. This could have been a much worse storm. What we just had could have been much worse.